Hello, my name's Terry Bergen, and this is Motivational Mythbusters, the show that supports the self-improvement industry. Together with my co-hosts Laurie Montague and Peter Turin, each week we'll take a look into some part of this billion-dollar industry to explore and uncover the best practices and emerging trends. We hope you enjoy these conversations as we bring to you an eclectic range of guests who operate within the self-improvement industry. Now, before we introduce today's guests, let me say hello to my co-hosts Laurie Montague and Peter Turin. How are you both today?
Really good, thanks, Terry. Going well, mate, and super excited to talk to Mark today. Mate, I just love the people that we're getting on our show, their backgrounds. It's so interesting, and so I know with myself I have some great questions to talk to Mark about, and I know Peter will be doing the same thing, right, mate?
What a brilliant way to finish off Motivational Mythbusters year 2020 with Mark today. No shortage of energy, that's for certain.
He's a great guy as well, Mark. You know, he's just one of those people that as well as he'll have a dig at me and stuff like that, and
as we all do.
Yeah, as we all do, because I am the bad boy of motivation. Don't forget that, right? That's my terminology. But Mark, I saw Mark speak when I first moved into the speaker bureau space, and I was taken by his authenticity and very interested in the types of things he was saying, even small things which he may go into, like having a hot cup of water before you go to bed at night, because your intestines or whatever, they're like pipes, and if they're hard, they contract, and if there's anyway, he'll probably go into some of that stuff. He's a very clever boy. So you both had a great week, no doubt. Peter Turin, how's Melbourne, mate? Now you've got your freedom.
It's been awesome, mate. Moving around. I had a weekend away, took 3 little grandchildren away last weekend. Everything's an adventure for them. So to see the world through their eyes, and I'm not known for my maturity, by the way, as you well know. So the 6-year-old's already outgrown me, which is troubling for me. But it's fantastic. It's an exciting time of the year. People are smiling. People are out and about. The world ain't too shabby. We're okay, mate.
Yeah, we're in pretty good place, and we've got a couple of people saying hello to already. Hello, Ellie Johnson, Truth Maven, and hello, Shiv. How you doing, mate?
Hey, Ellie, Shiv.
Happy Christmas and happy
Thanks
holidays.
for joining us.
Now, Laurie, I saw you posted something that really resonated with me today about the guy sitting on the surfboard in the middle of the surf, and the goal is to stay as young as you can for as long as you can. Was that the vibe of that? How did that go?
Pretty much, that's the vibe, mate. The thing is, I posted something the other day that was quite profound. It was a country singer who played golf with Clint Eastwood. And as they're going around, this is only 2 years ago, so Clint Eastwood's 88 years old. And he said, what are you doing, Clint, with yourself? And Clint said, I'm just about to go into production to do another movie. And he said, what's that all about? Like he's now 90 and still making movies. And he said, don't let the old man in. He said, I don't let the old man in. So the guy goes away and he pens a song, right, about don't let the old man in. And Clint Eastwood says that's the deal with him. He said he's got to wake up every day and look forward to being like you are when you're younger and you're ambitious and you're just looking at the world as if the world is your oyster kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. So I thought that was just wonderful. So that post that I posted of the old guy with the long hair and the beard sitting on his surfboard waiting for a wave is, that's where I see myself, is I just don't want to let the old man in.
Mate, I love that so much, that whole thing about having genuine purpose in your life. We want to feel fulfilled. But to wake up in the morning with that get up and go, something to look forward to get out. And I'm sure you're going to bring that to life with Mark today. I mean, what a perfect person to have as a guest, given the conversation we're having now.
Yeah, we've had a great pre-show talk, and which is one of the things that I really enjoy the opportunity of doing is you get to meet someone who you've never met before. In my case, Peter, you met Mark once, maybe? You've chatted, yeah.
And we certainly will, certainly based on our conversation.
Yeah.
I think it's a great tip for people who are producing podcasts as well to get their guests on a little bit earlier. What we found is that rather than starting cold and getting them on 5 minutes, prior to the show, and we can frame up and make sure everything's right. But the conversation that's had prior to that with primarily Peter and Laurie, that just helps the guest who's coming on be more relaxed and understand where we're at, and we're pretty relaxed here. So anyway, let's get today's guest on. Mark Bunn will change the way you think about wellness and quite possibly change your life, simplifying the shift to conscious living, creating happier, healthier and stress-free lives through the collective wisdom of East meets Wests. Welcome to Motivational Mythbusters. Mark, how you doing?
Terry, Laurie, Peter, I'm very well. I'm a little bit overawed at such good-looking blokes to be talking with, the Three Musketeers, but should have spent a bit more time doing my hair this morning, but no, it's a great pleasure to be here.
Yeah, mate. Well, pre-show we were talking about your AFL record with your goal kicking, and as you said, 2 goals in your career, mate. It's pretty good, but they didn't mention your assists. What's going on there?
Well, it's all about quality too, that, Terry. Quality, not quantity.
So, that is, mate. Look, I think to start the show off, mate, before Laurie and Peter get stuck into you with a million questions, and just tell us a little bit about your journey, mate, because ex-AFL player to keynote speaker, and given your chosen field of focus, that's quite a trip.
It is, yeah. I usually tell people the fact that probably no one's ever heard my name before tells you a lot about how good I was as an AFL footballer. But actually, not being a superstar was actually good in many ways, because it broadened my horizons about performance, because I had to look for every little avenue to get the best out of myself. So at 19, I stumbled across something called transcendental meditation, which 31 years ago was pretty weird sounding. And I did it and I loved it. And it got me into this whole idea of, the Eastern philosophies and the whole idea of Zen, and that peak performance is not just about more and more activity and effort and strain. It's about the zone state. It's about less is more. It's about mind-body integration, and right through to everything we're going to talk about today, possibly, spiritual enlightenment, bliss, you name it. So, yeah, it's an interesting journey, and it's great to be sharing a bit of it today with 3 such wise men.
So
Humour.
Let's
make that 2, Terry.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Thanks, appreciate that. Don't forget, I am the bad boy. So let's bring my old mate Laurie in, and Laurie will go deep with you, mate, because I know you like going deep as well. So welcome, Loz, and I'm just going to head stage left now and leave you.
Terry, just before you do, mate,
yes, mate.
I want you to stay in on the first part of this, because you made a comment, and Mark, it's so good to have you on the show, mate, and so looking forward to this. But Terry, you made a comment that when you saw Mark, and I've heard you mention this a bunch of times, and I know where you're going with this. And as I mention this, what I'm going to say now, Peter will be squirming in his chair because he wants to hear this. You talk about integrity in speakers, right? And basically that Mark is speaking from a place of integrity. As someone who's, in a way, he's been there, done that. It's not book smart. You've got a bit of both, and we'll get into that, Mark. But Terry, can you just sort of elaborate a little bit on this idea of a speaker that has integrity, please, mate, with Mark here, because it's important, I think, and it's not just about the professional speakers that you work with, Terry. It's obviously important in the sense that you're not going to work with someone who doesn't have that. But maybe you want to explain a little bit more about what it was that when you saw Mark on stage that really captured your attention. If you could expand on that, I'd be really interested to know.
Sure. Well, I mean, look, Laurie,
it's
not only what I saw on stage, it's the experiences that I've had with Mark in conversing with him and communicating with him over the last 10 or so years since I've known him, that he doesn't change his... I mean, we've done a few things together, and some of them work, some haven't worked, and so on and so forth. But Mark's demeanour stays the same. He's congruent with who he is. He doesn't, like I know that if I walked away and someone else come up, he'd be saying nice things about me. Come on. But he would. I'm fully confident in that. And I can't say that about every keynote speaker. And I know that keynote speakers know, this level of integrity in other speakers as well. That it's there to see. I mean, it gets shouted from the rooftops. however they say. But I'm just happy that, you know, Mark's a friend of mine. I do consider him as a friend, and I've seen him speak and I've seen his material. I'm a great supporter of the work he does, and I know he reciprocates that with what I look to do within this industry, which is certainly not you know, what your average Joe does. So I always appreciate that, Mark, and as I say, I'm glad to call you a friend, and I'm happy to promote whatever it is that you're doing whenever you're doing it.
Right back at you, Terry, and yes, ups and downs shouldn't change anything, and yeah, no, friends for life, buddy.
There you go, Loz.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for that. That's great. Mark, mate, again, thank you for coming on the show today. I am particularly interested in the journey you've had from Western mindset, Western, you know, you've got a sports science background from university, being a competitive sports person in Australia, which is not an unusual thing. You know, a lot of Australians grow up because there's a strong sporting culture. And so you've started your life off that way, but somehow you've made the leap across into Eastern, a lot of the Eastern mindset, Eastern ways. Mate, can you speak a little bit about that to start with? I've got 3 questions for you, but if you could just start and just give me, you just said before that you started with transcendental meditation, and that was the beginning of it. Would you mind expanding a little bit on that? What happened from there and how you got to basically where you are today, if that's possible?
No, absolutely. Well, as I said, yeah, AFL was the start for me as a kid. That's all I wanted to do, was to play football, and even girls were secondary to that. That's how focused I was. And, you know, obviously to make AFL, you need a certain level of skill and fitness and determination. But I was at the lower end. You know, I wasn't a superstar who could just turn up and be best on ground every week. I had to really look for every avenue I could to improve my performance. So the TM meditation was great because it just, that ability to get out of my head. You know, in the Western concept, it's very much headspace. You know, we crunch the numbers, it's analysis, it's, you know, we've got to think about everything, it's intellectual. Whereas the Eastern traditions, or the great yogis, the philosophers, the great spiritual masters always tell us that, you know, the secrets to life lie within, you know, at the depths of the mind, at that level beyond the mind, where those insights, those creative things that we get in business, that's where they come from. So we have to be able to settle the mind down. And the teacher of TM is a guy called Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, a great sort of Indian scholar, and his famous analogy was like the ocean. He says on the surface of the ocean, we have waves, you know, and the waves can often be quite turbulent or agitated, and they're crashing into each other. And the surface of the ocean is like the surface of the mind. You know, we have thoughts, they're agitated, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to do this. But he says the secret is to be able to allow the mind to settle down, like we drop anchor. And if we can drop anchor and settle the mind down to its depths, then just like at the bottom of an ocean, where the ocean is completely calm, silent, just like when you surf, Laurie, you know, you're out, you're catching the wave, you're on the surface, it's active. But as a diver, if we dive down to the depths, just completely calm, silent. And the mind is exactly the same. In the West, we've been trained to do everything from an activity part of the mind. You know, even our meditation today, everyone who meditates is usually doing something active with their mind. They're trying to be mindful. They're contemplating this. They're listening to this. Whereas transcending, as in transcendental meditation, transcending is the ancient technique taught thousands and thousands of years ago, you know, Peter with the martial artists and all these great yogis, is to go beyond meditation. That's what transcend means, to go beyond. So we go beyond the busyness of the mind, experience what they call the self, experience who we essentially are, get that quietness, get that calm, and then we come back out into activity like the eye of the hurricane. The busyness of life is still going around. You're still trying to play AFL football, or to be a pro golfer, or to be a martial artist, or a mother, or a father, or a business person. But things don't grip you as much. You're sort of centered, and the activities going around you that you think clearer, more clarity, more focus, therefore more productive and efficient. And that's what really intrigued me about initially TM, and then from there, my teacher a few years later, because I was studying Western health science, gave me a book on Ayurvedic medicine, particularly to do with sports science and exercise. And it was all about how the purpose of sport and exercise is not to run us into the ground, so we've got to sit on the couch for 3 days to recover after it. It's actually to create this ultimate state, the zone state, enlightenment, that we actually perform at our peak, but with no strain, no stress, completely effortless, perfect mind-body integration. This is what the great philosophers, the Platos, the Aristotles, they were exercise aficionados. They did exercise a lot because they knew it would transfer into their creative pursuits and their philosophy. And so strong body, strong mind, that whole thing. So that got me into Ayurvedic medicine. I studied that informally, came back, studied it formally, and then from there started to really integrate these ancient Eastern wisdoms of life, Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, with the sort of Western health science that was coming out to back it up.
Mate, that is, I'm listening to you and it's bringing a smile to my face. I particularly resonated with the sport is all about, a zone state ultimately, to get to that place. And you're so right. And the great athletes find that place. And so, which is fantastic. I mentioned to you in pre-show that one of the things that I've discovered in talking to a lot of people over the years is that in the West there's this pursuit of academic excellence, or the continual professional development. Getting the accreditations and this and that, and having them on your wall and so on. But people are struggling like crazy in their life. Their personal development is being overlooked by this getting on the computer screen and just getting getting more credits because you've got this or that. And look, I'm not discounting that by saying that that's not important. Professional development is incredibly important, but personal development, the development of self, is where it's at. Mate, so my first question to you is this, Mark. As you see it, what is the single biggest problem people are facing in the Western world currently?
Probably exactly what you just finished on, and that is a lack of understanding, or deeper, a lack of connection to their self. When we use the term even self-development, what most people think of is developing some physical, tangible, material aspect of themselves, as you were saying, to get a higher degree, to get some better certification they can put on the wall, to build a bigger muscle, or to get better six-pack, or tighter butt, whatever the latest thing is. It's developing the physical, or even the mental, and even the last decade, emotional resilience or emotional IQ. But all of these, from a traditional, ancient, Eastern, enlightened perspective, are still material expressions of what our real self is. Traditionally, they talk about the three big questions in life. Who am I? Or more particularly, what am I? Which the answer is spirit. We are all completely non-physical beings, spiritual beings that have expressed in a physical body to experience life. Second question, well, why are we here? Why are we here? We're here to experience that self, that deeper self, our spiritual selves, and to live that in our physical body to the highest level, which is self-realization. We often hear these terms of these philosophers or saints. They're self-realized. What does that mean? They've completely realized that deeper, non-physical, intangible, unbounded part of themselves, spiritual enlightenment, nirvana, whatever language or tradition you come from. And the third one is, well, how do we achieve that? And that's probably another couple of sessions in themselves, but we do transcending, which I touched on earlier. We go beyond the mind, we go beyond the emotions, we go beyond the physical body and experience the self directly. We experience that spiritual nature And as Maharshi says, it's like dipping a cloth. We have a white cloth, we want to make it blue. We dip the cloth in the blue dye, we take it out, we expose it to some activity, we go about our day. At the end of the day, we transcend again, we dive in, experience the self, and repeatedly, like exposing it to the sun, every time we do that, the colour gets a little bit more permanent. And over weeks and months and years, eventually, the blue colour is permanent. You no longer have to dip it. That's enlightenment or self-realisation. And then linked to that's a whole other sort of various things we can dive into around what they call the Vedic knowledge. The term Veda actually means knowledge, but it's not knowledge that you talked about, Laurie, as in academic credentials or this bit of research. It's not material, outward, external knowledge. It's knowledge of the underlying non-physical laws of nature that govern life. Our whole universe is governed by laws of nature. There's laws that govern how the planets revolve around the sun, that bring the tides in and out each day, that when a baby's born, it grows according to certain laws, certain intelligence. There's a system there. And if we humans can know what these laws are, governing digestion, metabolism, work, etc., relationships, work or dharma, then we can, as if like a surfer, Laurie, you would know exactly. The key to surfing is timing. And I say this in all my seminars. It's like a wave on the ocean. If we have knowledge, we have wisdom, we catch the wave when the wave is at its peak. I've got a picture of Manly in the background here. I used to live in Manly and you'd see the surfers every morning. So a wise surfer knows that you catch a wave at the right time. Mother Nature does all the work. And it's like when you're in the zone, Laurie, and you get a great wave at Cottesloe, wherever you're surfing, Scarborough over there?
Absolutely.
And it's just easy. It's effortless. It's enjoyable. And that's how life's meant to be. If you're swimming against the currents or you're swimming out to the wave when the wave's coming and smashing on top of your head like it did for me at Manly whenever I surfed because I couldn't surf, hard work, mouthful of water, bloody surfing, never going to do this again. So the ancient Eastern, what they called rishis, a rishi is a seer, someone who sees not through the eyes, but through the mind's eye or the eye of consciousness, who can see or hear or experience those laws of nature that govern life. And if we can understand this knowledge, Vedic knowledge, live in tune with it, then life flows. We have good health, mentally, physically, emotionally. We're drawn to the right careers or vocations, all those sorts of things. That sort of, we've spoken about flow, and Peter will talk about from a martial artist that, I forget that word he discussed on our pre-chat, but when we, effortless effort, exactly that.
Yeah. Mate, that's beautiful, and it probably leads me into my next question. And I did a little bit of research as I do, just to kind of get a bit of a feeling about where we're going, and as it related to Ayurvedic medicine, that in the West, particularly the United States and Europe, there's a lot of stuff that's banned. They said different levels of toxicity in terms of metals and so on, which is fair enough. I can understand that, but clearly that's also that there's all these barriers put up because Western medicine is a big, powerful machine, right? Bottom line, it's all about money and it's all about control, and so I get that. So I overlook that when I'm reading it. I'm going, well, what really, in essence? I'm going to ask you. I'm thinking to myself, the question I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask Mark, is how does ancient Eastern medicine help people today, Mark? Yeah, so that's my question to you, mate.
Great question, and it would be worth backtracking a little bit to your point about Ayurvedic herbs and basically toxic metals. I've obviously heard about this, and it's a really interesting one because it answers your question in terms of we always have to delineate between wisdom and the label of wisdom. And this is really Western medicine to a T. It's like saying I went to a doctor and the doctor, gave me this really dodgy advice and I feel really sick and we're just the worst doctor ever. And therefore we label all doctors as bad. So we have to understand what Ayurveda is. Ayurveda is the Veda, the knowledge of life. That's the literal definition. And what it really is not something written in a book 6,000 years ago, or not something that's created a herb in the name of Ayurveda, but without the wisdom of how to put that herb together, and we put some lead in or we put some mercury and we don't think anyone's going to know about it. So someone can use the word Ayurveda, but it have completely no knowledge in what they're doing. And quite the opposite, as we touched on at the start, someone without any academic credentials whatsoever, they've never been set foot in a classroom or a university or have no accreditation whatsoever, could be the wisest person on the planet. And often it's the case. You know, the great spiritual teachers have no formal accreditation, but they understand the wisdom of life. And so that's what we always have to try and get to, this difference between knowledge and wisdom, or information and wisdom. And so what the Eastern tradition can teach us is really the foundation of where we put our attention and what we explore. And this is the beauty of East meeting West. Most of our Western pharmaceutical drugs today are based on herbal medicine. It's an active ingredient in a certain plant or a certain bit of bark from a tree that modern science then goes and extracts and makes a drug out of. And Peter will talk a lot more about this if he wants to. And so the ancient wisdom is there. I talk a lot about daily cycles, seasonal cycles. The latest modern science is now talking about circadian medicine, chronobiology, how different things we do in different times of the day produce completely different results. You give a drug to a rat at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, almost no physiological effect. Give the same drug to the same rat at 4 o'clock in the morning and you can kill it. You know, world records in Olympic pursuits, completely different depending on the time of the day athletes were competing. And so personalized medicine, you know, Ayurvedic medicine forever, since the dawn of time, always prescribed diet, exercise, relationships, all according to one's constitution. Unless you know who you're talking to, what their nature is, their makeup of essential elements, you know, whether they're an airy type or a fiery type or an earthy type, you can't prescribe whether coffee's good for them or high intensity exercise is bad for them or ice baths or hot saunas. And what modern science is now doing the last 5 or 10 years, personalized medicine. Oh, CSIRO, just in the last week or two. Oh, we need to personalize the diet to different people. So Eastern medicine, in my opinion, can just cut short modern scientific investigation. Because in the West, there is that tendency to, that arrogance, I don't like to use that word, but, you know, we know everything, science is the way. But they can cut short that endeavor by going back to the ancient wisdoms that have served the test of time for thousands of years and use that wisdom as the launching pad to, you know, find it in a modern perspective. So that's what I think the Eastern traditions can really bring our Western world.
You know, it reminds me of, as you were saying that, it reminds me of something I heard the late great Jim Rohn say at a leadership weekend one time, and he got talking about a story, and he said at some point in time, he goes, "And who sold you on that idea?" And I think in discussing this with you and people growing up in the West and then following the education pathway and then leading into a job, and then this is like this ultimate thing, and then the family comes along, and then, you know, and the house and the and blah 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 blah. And I'm thinking, as we're talking, I'm thinking, who sold you on that idea? Where did that all come from? Because you get smarter, you have the accreditations and so on, but at the end of the day, you are not tuned into yourself. And when it tends to happen is a little bit later on in life, you know, where you're getting older and you become a little bit wiser, which is what you're really getting to, and which I love, is this idea of what wisdom is. That we're in a world today that is so wrapped up in knowledge and people spewing this stuff out of themselves, but but still can't find the happiness within. They can't find this sense of being present and just allowing nature to talk to you and to use your instincts and your insights to guide you. Which leads me to my third question, mate. Third and final question before Peter comes on. And as with all your knowledge and experience to this point in time, Mark, if you could give people one piece of advice that they could take to the grave, what would it be?
It would be to learn how to transcend if they haven't already learnt, and then to practice that daily for as many days they are on earth. As we said, the essence of life, the eternal part of nature and existence, as all the great wisdom keepers have suggested, lies within. You know, Socrates to Plato to the great female wisdom keepers in the great traditions. Don't go outside of yourself for the answers to life's mysteries. Go within. Close the eyes, learn how to transcend, which is different from meditation. I'm actually just releasing a book early in the new year, which is all about that. Don't just meditate, transcend. They're quite different things, completely different brain waves. Alpha brainwave coherence in the front of the brain. We access what's called the genius lounge, which is as business people, entrepreneurs, we have our best ideas. We keep the front of the brain awake, alert, lively, our focus, our CEO of the brain, our decision making. But the default mode network, they call it the genius lounge, does not go offline when we transcend. Both of them are alive, they're communicating. When we do mindfulness practices, which are fantastic, I really, really promote them, but mindfulness shuts the default mode network off. So we have one without the other. All the great teachers, the spiritual masters, the yogis have all said the same thing. Go beyond, experience the self, transcend, come back out into activity. That would be my
That's beautiful, mate. Thank you so much for that.
Awesome, Laurie, as usual, mate. Deep questions and eliciting great answers from Mark. So over to you, Peter Turin. I'm sure you're looking forward to getting in there and having a chat with your fellow Melburnian.
Here comes the karate chop.
Hey.
Oh my golly gosh. I said pre-show that the depth will come from Laurie, the superficial stuff will come from
Not true, Peter.
I honestly think I'm interrupting this conversation. I'm just sitting back. They say when the student's ready, the master will appear, and I'm just taking notes. Mate, I so much for me to listen and to learn and then have the courage to do. But something I need to flip on its head immediately is that your focus on AFL football 1, girls 2. For me, I just want to get it out of the way because for me it was in reverse, and that may have been the cause of something.
There you go. That's what it was.
Okay, I've got rid of it. All right. Also, too, the other thing I was giggling at is that Laurie set this up by saying, Mark, I've got 3 questions to ask you. It is the longest I've ever had to wait to listen for the first question to come. That was the biggest gap in our Motivational Mythbusters shows, waiting for Laurie's first question. And mate, that is massive kudos to you, because I think that we could just sit back and just listen to the discussion. And I was thinking that the one time I saw Robin Williams being interviewed by Michael Parkinson did not get the first question out for the entire show. The moment Robin Williams sat down, it was just go for broke. And I was gut laughing. 11:30 at night, I must have woken up the neighbourhood. But, well, this is not as humorous. The learnings here are massive. And I come very much from Western philosophy background. You know, my dad, who I love dearly, he's 90 years of age, was old school doctor. You know, I remember when I was still a kid living at home and I'd be running at 4:30, 4:45 in the morning, and I'd sneak out of the house. And there was my dad putting his car into the garage, you know, at 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning. I said, Dad, where have you been? You know, he'd been out on house calls. And I said, well, what about the locum service? And my dad's standard answer to me was, Pete, they're my patients. So I grew up seeing awesome work ethic, and my dad was a doctor. And for 20 years, I owned and operated retail pharmacies. So doctor, pharmacist, very Western mindset, Mark. And all of a sudden, this introduction into Eastern philosophy, did you find that there was that resistance from a lot of people that's like myself that really came from Western background, and to listen to someone like yourself, that you really had to give me a bit of a shake up first and really let me know where the value was for me?
Really interesting question. I'd just like to touch on the AFL girls one first, Pete, and that was that
Please.
I wasn't.
We can spend the show on that if you like.
Yeah. I wasn't so good with the girls. I was pretty shy as a kid. So my philosophy was, if I could make AFL, then it would open the doors to get the girls. So
right, so I know we need to move away from footy and girls, but I don't want you to misunderstand and think that I was fabulous with girls, but I was incredibly enthusiastic. I'll just give you that. All right.
Beautiful.
So
and
where?
Well, it's really interesting. It's funny, and Terry will vouch for this. I have this deja vu experience with speaker bureaus, particularly over the last 5 years, that I'll do an event, I'll speak at a conference, and the feedback will come back, and the speaker bureau person will ring me up and say, Mark, we had this, wonderful feedback from the client, and what are you doing different today than you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago? And it's really intriguing because I'm not doing anything different. I've actually got a talk tomorrow, and it's the first face-to-face event, obviously start of the year. And I keep thinking, what am I going to update? What am I going to do differently? And then I just always come back to the same thing, because what I speak about is these timeless, common sense, simple wisdoms of life that have been around since the dawn of time. And the answer to your question is that when I speak to people, and I've spoken to doctors, I speak a lot to nurses, pharmacists, I've done conferences with pharmacists, and I don't talk about the Western side so much. I just present the Eastern wisdom, and it's not really even fair to talk about Eastern and Western. If it's wisdom, it's wisdom. Laurie, we discussed at the start. Truth is one. We just call it by different names. And so Western medicine has enormous wisdom, enormous knowledge. It's not perfect, but it has some wonderful things. Doctors, nurses are just the most beautiful people on the planet. But the Eastern tradition also has that time-honoured tradition of not having to put something under a microscope to prove that it works. And what that is called is time-proven medicine. If you do something 1,000 times in 50 different cultures for 5,000 years and it gets exactly the same result, then you're going to be pretty confident that you're going to get it the next time you do it. And so it's just truth is embedded into every cell of our bodies. And so when we hear truth, it doesn't matter whether we put an Eastern label or a Western label, we feel it, we resonate with it. That's true. When I talk with Terry spoke at the start, if you're trying to digest food and food works on the principle of heat, and I stand up in a seminar, I get a big cigarette lighter with a massive flame, and I talk about how we need heat to digest the food and to transform it. And then I get a big jug of ice cold water that most people drink every day of their life, particularly in places like America where you can't even get a drink without half a bucket of ice in it. And you pour a cup of ice cold water on a digestive fire, what's going to happen to the fire? You're going to put it out. Therefore, it just makes sense, doesn't it, that might compromise how you digest the food that you put in your belly, which is why people can't work out why I eat such a good diet. I eat this and I eat that, and then they're swinging down all these ice cold drinks or ice creams, and they have no digestive fire. And so these little things, people hear them and it just, that makes sense. That is what I do. So I don't try and put Western medicine down whatsoever. I've had a wife that had breast cancer, Peter, as we discussed briefly, who, her belief was Western medicine. For her to go and, sit with her legs crossed all day and to, chant things, that's not her belief system. So I think she had the best chance for recovery by embracing Western medicine. It's, we've got to have that belief system in what we do. Hope.
Mate, I love when you talk about understanding the wisdom of life. You actually have to have lived a bit of life to understand the wisdom of life. I know I was the little kiddie, the 8-year-old boy who had this dream. You referenced my martial arts before, but I had the dream as an 8-year-old boy, but never got into the game until I was 36. When I first started martial arts, I thought it was all about learning how to fight. But I learned in time that it had nothing to do with fighting whatsoever. But that's, to use your words, which I hope you're comfortable with me using them, is to understand the wisdom of life. It was only by immersing myself into it that I realised it was so much more profound than that. And in fact, I travelled the world speaking, using martial arts as a metaphor for life. About courage to make a start, to get into the game. Today, I've got a new program coming out next year, and it's all around get in the game. But to have that courage to do that and to rise to these different challenges, to ultimately be remarkable, however you define remarkable. And I just want to come back to be remarkable. There are 3 things that you mentioned very early on in your discussion with Laurie today, and I just was scribbling them down. And so powerful. 3 things that you said early on in this conversation. 1 was getting the best out of yourself. 2 was zone state, and 3 was less is more. I think most of us, that getting the best out of yourself, the power of the questions that we ask. I want to tap into what it is that you're talking about today, because maybe me getting the best out of myself, my focus has been too narrow. I need to look at the yogis and the people who you're espousing and talking about, to read a bit more of Yuval Noah Harari, when he talks, just different reading to the standard reading that I do. Zone state. Laurie asked the question, basically said, well, the need to get to that place. I think that we could be so much more enlightened by your good self about how to get into that zone state, because if that's where I'm performing at my peak, I want to spend as much time in my zone state as I can. So my question to you is, how do I do it? But before I get you to answer that, is that whole notion that if everything's important, nothing's important. You said less is more. So for me, straight away, I'm thinking if less is more, then I've got to learn to be better at less and push the non-essential stuff away and just be better at less. So I know this is, and time is going to smash us, and pre-show, Laurie, I spoke to you about this maybe is just part 1 of this discussion, but getting the best out of yourself, zone state, less is more. I'm going to imagine, and maybe speak for our audience, that most of us love to really bring those 3 areas to life in buckets. It's not really a question, but I'd love your thoughts.
Well, my thought is that I love it because you've mentioned 3 things, and essentially those 3 things are the same thing. And in all ancient traditions, they have a formula or a structure of 3 and 1. Father, Son, Holy Ghost, Shiva, Vishnu, Brahm. There's these 3. All religions have a oneness, a Godhead. There's universal oneness, unity, unlocalized. And then they'll often have 3, this expression into 3. So 3 and 1 is like a universal structure in everything. And if you get to that level of nature we discussed, that the rishis, the ancient seers, could experience as a 24/7 reality, they were witnessing the oneness of life expressing or materializing into 3, and then from 3 into many. So those 3 parts, Peter, are exactly the same thing. The best we can be is our true self. Our true self is not Mark Bunn, Peter Turin, Laurie Montague that has, a wife and a certain number of kids and done this many talks that year and 6 foot whatever. It's, as we discussed, is consciousness in a pure sense. We are spirit. Spirit is one, not divided. So how do we get there? We get there by reducing activity, doing less. From the surface of the ocean, instead of looking out to how we can be better or to do less or to whatever, we quieten the mind, we transcend, and we experience that silence. one of my favorite quotes of all time is by Claude Debussy. And he said that music is the space between the notes. Music is the space between the notes. Life is music. If we fill our life with endless activity, even activity where we're trying to work out the deeper truths of life, or how to get into the zone, or to be the best parent or business person, that's still activity. So the secret, and the third little pillar of the stool here, is the zone. The zone actually is the same thing as the first part of the question, our best self. Our best self is when we are in the zone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The zone is nothing other than what Maharishi would call cosmic consciousness, or the ancients would call nirvana, or self-realization. That's the permanent state of being in the zone 24/7. How do we get there? By doing less, experiencing the self, and as Laurie will attest, and all of us will attest, even in martial arts, trying to get into the zone physically through effort is the number one way to stop yourself getting into it, because it's an effortless state. So the way to get into the zone and to cultivate this experience more and more in our life is not to work on the active part, the performance part. It's to work on the silence part, because this is what's missing in our world today. As a friend of mine who I speak with in America, she says we worship at the altar of activity in our Western world. It's all about activity. Mother Nature has an eternal, immutable formula for success in life. And it is rest and activity. For every day, there's night. For every summer, there's winter. While one leg is walking, the other leg is resting. The heart pumps out, recovers. Everything is rest and activity. The more dynamic and successful the outward activity we want, the higher we want to build the skyscraper in Service Paradise, Laurie, the deeper we have to dig down. The further we want to pull the arrow, shoot the arrow forward, the further we have to pull it back. Beautiful. So the zone, the answer to that question is forget the outward, forget the activity in a physical sense, and transcend activity. Go within. As I said, TM's been my way to do that for 31 years. Very easy, effortless meditation. Maharishi says that to try to do TM is prohibited. You're not allowed to try to do transcendental meditation, because it's an effortless process. And that's basically life. The less we try, as we all know, the less we try, the better it goes. The less we try.
Beautiful stuff, Mark. I'm as you see, I'm the hassler and the hustler here. This is what I like to call our jam session. So if we've all been playing our instruments now, we all come together and we have a little bit of a jam session, like a boogie woogie on the dance floor together. Mate, I'm interested to know, because I know sometimes there is a little bit of a juxtaposition between the types of things that you're teaching to corporates, particularly on the executive level I'm going to talk to you about here. But do you know if there's a direct correlation between the return on investment that your type of teaching can have, on that top level of, particularly the way executives think, right? Football and, have a drink. I'm sorry, guys, but it's a little bit that way. It's particularly in our culture in Australia. And I know in America as well, it's all about the sport and the drink, rah, 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 let's get it done. So what is the advantage in a return on investment type space for say there was like a bean counter watching, a very high-end bean counter here. What can you say to me now that would make this guy say, I've got to get Mark in to talk to our people, particularly our executives, to get them thinking differently?
Yeah, well, Well, two. Firstly, before we get into the hard numbers and the numbers, which is what you want, the bottom line return, there is a big shift now. You spoke about, particularly executive level, this mentality that has been in business that, we play hard during the week, we work hard during the week, and then we party hard after hours or on the weekend. This is completely changing before our eyes. If you look at the top business people in the world, and those that are running really successful multinational companies, the Ariana Huffingtons, the Oprahs, the Tim Ferrisses, the health and well-being is the absolute basis and foundation for not only their personal success, but what they are driving through their organizations. When I first started speaking 20 years ago, health and well-being was the soft science. You had your salespeople and your marketing people, and they'd be paid the big money, and then you might have a little health guy that comes on at the end and, tells you to eat your celery and make everyone feel good. Now, health and well-being is absolutely number one. Why? Because we're now starting to have, one, the science, but two, the numbers to back it up. And so what now, in terms of absenteeism, 10, 20 years ago, billions of dollars. I think it was $6.9 billion in Australia on absenteeism in the last few years. But now what they're showing is something called presenteeism. Presenteeism is not absenteeism where your workers don't turn up to work because they're so sick. It is now they turn up to work because they still want to get paid and they don't want to look weak and, they're being driven. But they may as well be in bed.
They're not present.
Their productivity, they're not present and they're not productive. So they're costing you as a business owner or a company, but you're getting no return. And presenteeism is, depending on who you listen to, could be 3 times, $20+ billion a year costing Australian businesses, more obviously in the US. So if you convert that to per person spend on a conference, you've got 100 people in the room, you're paying me $7-8 grand. It's like I have to return like $80 a person for that person, every person in that room, to get your money and more. And I'm pretty confident I can deliver many, many, many times that per person.
Yeah, that is astounding. And I'd like to wave that flag because I know from my dealings with people I've had a few corporate lives myself, and I've often found that the thinking at that higher level does need to improve. Not that they're not doing a great job at their expertise, where their focus is. I mean, most of these guys are very clever, but the thinking and I call it the vibe, right? It's the vibe Marbo from that wonderful film. But I just wonder if they understand that, and if not, why not? Why isn't it's so glaringly obvious that people have jobs because they need to pay their mortgage as opposed to something that they're really passionate about? I mean, some people are lucky enough to find their passion, and I know a lot of people in finance, for example, say, I'm not passionate about this, it's really good money, but I can't get passionate about numbers and like trillions of dollars. I've got a really good friend who's high up, and I know. So how can you help them, be more sort of present at work with the things you teach? And is it just the keynote you do, or you probably need to do a half-day workshop or a full-day workshop to really get this home, and then come back and put a program in place, right?
Yeah, generally we do. I do a lot with school groups. Staff development days are massive these days. So with the schools, we often get half a day or a full day to really go deep. With the corporates, the general way we do it is a series of seminars or workshops. So we might do the keynote at the annual conference, and then we try and, come back every 3 or 6 months where we review what's been taught at the keynote, what's worked, what have been the challenges. This was a great success for me, but I struggled with this. And then we just add in little layers each time. And so, again, we have to differentiate between understanding that health and well-being is important, which, as you say, everyone tends to do, but the wisdom and the practical advice to make that easy to implement. And that's what I believe I do really well, and that's what I try and specialize in, because most business leaders and business owners might be listening to this and thinking, yes, health and well-being is important, but that means I've got to bring in some doctor to measure everyone's blood pressure and to, check their prostates, and, no one's going to want to do that, and I'm going to be the Grinch. But when I come in and we talk about, it's the mental health strategies and earthing yourself at the end of a workday, go and have a red wine and just connect to the grass and the earth, and the research that shows in terms of being present and less inflammation and body types, and how you can understand the people you're working with, going to differ depending on what foods they eat, and all this sort of, it's just basic, simple stuff. Light dinners at night, so you wake up refreshed and you can do your exercise. And because it's pitched, I pitch it to the people in the audience. So they're hearing from me as if this is a gift from my employer for me personally. They're not seeing it as, oh, this guy's been brought in by management to try and improve my productivity or, make business better. The business results are just a byproduct of people being happier. They're going home and doing it because they want to be a better parent or have more energy and to exercise and to lose weight. And just the fact that company benefits is a double bonus in many ways.
Mark, can I just jump in there as well? I think that's, firstly, I wish when I was at school that I was given this gift, because certainly way back then, this was not the case. But I love that. And interesting, because I sell myself as a gift as well when I go into speak, and certainly to schools and to a lot of corporates, because a lot of people are disgruntled. They don't want to be there, as we know. So I say, be really selfish just for this moment. Okay, this is a gift for you. It's got nothing to do with anybody or anything else. This is for you. And sometimes then people are more willing to engage and embrace. And something also too to Laurie and to Terry, what I've always wanted to encourage our listeners, and certainly today listening to Mark, all the martial arts quotes are buzzing through my head, and every little kiddie wanted to be like Bruce Lee. And one of my favourite Bruce Lee quotes, Mark, and very much pertaining to today, and I'm strongly encouraging all our listeners, having listened to you today, from Bruce Lee, to absorb what is useful, discard what is not, but then add what is uniquely your own. Okay, absorb what is useful, take on board what Mark's talking about. If you're not into yogis and so, that's okay, that's cool, that's okay. But absorb what is useful, discard what maybe you want to push away, but then have the courage to add what is uniquely your own. Get into the game and put your own stamp on it.
Yeah,
and I
agree,
today
Peter.
Was amazing.
And the one thing I wanted to mention about Mark's keynoting before I hand to Laurie for a closing statement, because we're just about out of time, is that Mark does this all with very much of a sense of humour. He's got a very good sort of sense of the crowd, and he does it so well in that he has running jokes all the way through his keynote. Am I right there, Mark?
I am, mate. Yes, as they say, my first speaking coach back in the day, the great Ron Tacky. He mentioned two things that I'll remember till the day I die. He says in a 45-minute keynote, you guys will love this, 8 to 11 minutes should be information or content. The rest is entertainment. And the old classic speaker one is, you don't have to be funny, only if you want to get paid. But I would also just like to add with that, for anyone listening who's interested in keynotes or workshops, I don't talk so much about the old yogis and the enlightened seers and the rishis, and that was a chat because I know Laurie and Peter are from that background. We wanted to dive deep, but in a corporate setting, it's very much these ancient principles, but in a very mainstream language, and then backed up by modern science. Everything I talk about, where there's modern science to back it up, I'll talk about that. So the data's there, the research, the effects on productivity and performance, and is all there. So it's very palatable, and we have a good time and have fun, and it's the way to go.
Mate, I look forward to sharing a stage with you.
We are certainly out of time now, Mr. Montague. Do you have anything to say in closing, Laurie?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that we need to have Mark back on in 2021, and to go deeper into this fascinating topic of moving our sense of self in the direction of becoming this oneness that Mark talks about, and that we experience from a sporting background, whether it's martial arts with Peter, or in a golf sense with me, or surfing or skateboarding, where you become one with the environment, one with the universe, if you will. And to some people that might go straight over their head, but we all know it. We know those times when we're no longer aware of ourselves, but we're just connected to everything. And I think you did a brilliant job today, Mark, of expressing it in a way that our audience can understand it, mate. So I really appreciate how well you did that. And as I said, we would love to have you come back on the show again sooner than later, and to share more of your insights and wisdom for our audience. Thank you so much, mate. It's been great having you on today.
And if I could just reinforce that, but I will tell you when we catch up, you can drink your hot water. I'll be having a cold. The two boys, because Terry's going to cut me off really, really quickly. I've loved being a part of this with you. Thank you. I hope you all feel the hug. And Tez, one last thing I'm going to say to our listeners, just since it's Christmas, New Year, launching into an amazing 2021, to quote Archbishop Desmond Tutu, do your little bit of good where you are. It's those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world. And as Peter Churin says, that's so easy to do, it's so easy not to do, and you'll get to choose. Do your little bit of good. Thank you, everybody. I've loved being a part of this.
Nice.
Hey, we've had some great comments as well. Josh Snyder's just said, absolutely great conversation. Earthing and drinking a red nut right now. Namaste.
Beautiful.
So, yeah, look, I'd be happy to have you back on, although, we had Peter back on, and then, now he's on every week, We think he just stays online waiting for us to turn back up. No, we're so happy to have Peter. He just brings such a warmth to the show that Laurie and I probably don't have. So I know sometimes he says, "Well, I'm no good in this conversation," but mate, you just bring it every week.
You are.
So
love you, mate.
Really appreciate you.
That is his shtick.
Yeah, he's good at it, man. I love him. Anyway, Mark, it's so great to have you on. We will have you back next year. Yeah. Everybody, have a fantastic Christmas. Wishing you all the best. I'm the bad boy of motivation, so I'll be drinking and doing all the naughty things for you, and then I'll be setting my goals for the new year and then taking some of your advice by then. But I'm just going to stick it away for now and do all the bad things up until Christmas. Like, I've got a goal this afternoon, as the guys know, right? Every Tuesday afternoon, I have a goal to go and sort of bathe in the brown liquid ale. Just a couple after the show, celebrate the show, and talk to Michelle about where we could improve. But anyway, guys, I wish you all the best, and we're going to have a great year, right? 2021 is going to be an absolute bottler. Yeah. So I wish the events industry, the motivational industry, the self-improvement industry all the best. Next year is going to be a much better year, and we're going to be here every week from 1 p.m. 1:15 p.m. every week on Tuesday on the Motivational Mythbusters channel on live on Facebook. And over and out, and see you soon. Thanks, Mark.
See you guys. Cheers.
Bye guys.